Welcome, listeners. I'm so thankful that you're here with us today. I'm excited. I have Jacklyn Rome, and I really want to get to know her better, and I want to learn about her app called Onward, and it's for parents who are divorced, and it helps them manage their finances. So this podcast is all about helping people feel less scared and giving them tools to make the divorce process better. So, Jacklyn, you are a perfect fit. You're the CEO and founder of Onward, and you look so young. I can't even believe that's true. But can you, Jacklyn, just as a way of introducing yourself, let us know what's the background? What made you want to start an app like Onward?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, Lisa, wonderful to be on the show today. Very happy to be here. In terms of what led me to starting Onward, I would say actually the journey started when I was very young. I came from a very entrepreneurial home and was excited about starting a company at some point later in my career and creating a company that I felt really did something positive for the world and impacted people's lives for the better. But actually, the connection to Onward has a personal story behind it. I came from a very close knit family as an only child and saw my parents get divorced at the age of 14, an age where you're just old enough to listen to both sides of what your parents are saying, comprehend it, and kind of be stuck somewhere in the middle, not knowing who to believe around what was happening. And while my parents actually had a fairly amicable divorce, for them, as for most people, money was the most difficult piece of that divorce process, both kind of as they were getting divorced and then even thereafter as it came to expenses for my life, whether that was expenses in high school or later in college. And I thought that there was a huge opportunity to use technology to automate and eliminate stressful conversations around money, all for the mission-driven benefit of reducing stress and tension in the lives of co-parents and creating happier homes for their children. So that's really how I came to start Onward.
Yeah, and that's why I love you, because if divorced parents can get along, it just does amazing things for their children. So I support anything that is going to help ease that and any little tricks. Can you go into some details about how Onward works and how my listeners could use it?
Absolutely. So Onward is a co-parenting app that helps two people manage all the shared expenses for their children. We're available in the Google Play Store and also in the Apple iOS store. So you can download us by just searching Onward or Onward co-parenting, and we should come up pretty quickly. Um, the way that the app works is usually one parent comes across it first. They download the app. They can then invite their co-parent to join them on the platform. From there, it's super easy to enter expenses, things like, let's say, a dentist appointment for $100. You can suggest that the expense is split 50-50 or 70-30 based on whatever agreement you have with your co-parent.
Mhm.
You can add all of the supporting information if you would like, such as receipts, images of the item you might have purchased, and then go ahead and click save. From there, your co-parent will receive notifications about the expense so that you don't need to actually text them yourself. They can go in, view the receipt if you added it, go ahead and pay you back directly via our app with our ACH transfer feature, or otherwise mark the expenses paid via Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, or Zelle, so that we can track exactly where money was sent from point A to point B. The beauty of this is that all of the back and forth that you might have had about that expense is now being handled by the app. So you don't need to text your ex, you don't need to send messy emailed spreadsheets. We
That-
take all of that stress off
That's
of people's plates.
exactly what I was thinking as you were sharing this. It's taking out the emotions of having to connect with the other person. So if people want this, I actually am an affiliate. And so I have in the show notes, people can click on and get the Onward app there. But one person signs up, then they invite the other parent to come. And then anytime, so what I'm hearing is anytime that you have an expense, like you said, a dentist appointment, you just put it in the app. You can attach, you just take a picture of the receipt and put it there if you want, ask for payment, but you're not really asking them. You're just putting the information in the app, which alerts the other parent. Can I
Exactly.
ask? So there are other apps that, you know, I won't name any names, but have to do with like messaging and where you actually talk to the other parent, or calendars. There's other apps that address those things. What made you stick with just the finances and the Onward app?
Yeah, great question. So we've done a ton of research at this point. I'd say maybe close to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 interviews with divorced and separated parents to inform how to build the best app possible. And what came up continuously in our research is that money tends to be the number one cause of arguments in co-parenting relationships. People generally do tend to have another solution, like a Google Calendar that works pretty well for the calendar functions. Messaging, you can basically send a text. And those features generally, particularly the messaging, is really targeted at by far the most contentious divorces, usually when you might be in a court process and you want your lawyers and the courts to have access to all of those communications. Otherwise, we really wanted to focus on the part that's most problematic for co-parents, which is the money, and do that part best. There are co-parenting apps out there that do have an expense feature, I would say kind of a mediocre functionality at best. And we're building our company really to be a more financial solution for co-parents, eventually with more unique financial products such as shared co-parenting debit cards, where people could eventually split expenses at the point of transaction, shared savings accounts for things like college, summer camp, and braces, so you can save for your kids' future, etc. So we've really focused particularly on the financial aspect of the relationship because that's really what the kids need to thrive, and also that number one cause of arguments among co-parents. Also, differently from other apps that exist out there, in addition to kind of the general expense management features that I've mentioned, we also feature spending reports so that you and your ex have granular details on how you're spending money on the kids. We itemize those reports, what you spent by month, by child, and by category. That helps people plan, budget, and save for the future. That feature is also very useful if you're still in the divorce process and figuring out what an appropriate child support payment might be, because you could actually kind of figure out what you're actually spending on the kids today by tracking everything in the app and inform that spend based on actual data.
Jacklyn, as I'm thinking through this with my clients, I feel like at the initial consultation, I want to let them know to do this, because a big part of the fear and trying to figure things out is the budget. And we all know that the best way to really understand your budget is to see what you're actually spending. So I feel like, and I wasn't using it that way, I feel like this is going to be a fantastic tool for people who are just beginning the divorce process or even thinking about it, to have a way to track those expenses. So important. And it brings clarity, which can bring peace. And it helps you to really know what you need. Like, what can you expect your extra expenses are going to be after the divorce? So I love that. And I didn't think about that. And I'm so sorry, but I have to stop you and go back. When you were talking about the future of this app and you talked about a shared debit card, I went, ooh. So I can't, I'm sure some people are like, ooh, I got away from that person. How is that going to work? Is it going to be tied to a bank account and each person puts a certain amount in and then the percentage automatically? And then maybe you don't even know yet, but what are your thoughts?
This is definitely a future product that we're working on, but we've gathered so much feedback at this point from co-parents, and we would be building kind of with all that feedback in mind. Actually, the product would be set up with two separate bank accounts because we know that's important feedback. People want that separation. And the secret sauce to the product would actually be our spending controls. That would enable both parents to set limits on the cards, limits even by vendor. So you could only enable a transaction, let's say, at a vendor like Adidas for X dollars, and only that transaction could go through on the card. And so the spending controls, particularly for divorced parents, are really crucial to making this work. So both parties could be comfortable spending money on the card. But the idea behind the card is actually to stop some of the negative downstream effects of co-parenting finances in their tracks, where you could actually split expenses out of your two separate accounts at the point of transaction, so that one person doesn't always need to upfront 100% of the money and then wait up to a month to be repaid, as a lot of co-parents typically only settle up once a month.
Jacqueline, that is so interesting. So I didn't even get that piece of it. So what you're saying is you kind of agree, like maybe this is a cap that we're going to spend on ski equipment. And then you go in and it automatically charges. Like you actually have the power to use that card. So say you're a single mom and dad's paying, or your ex is paying 70%, and there's a cap amount that you've agreed upon. That automatically comes out right when that's amazing. I
Yeah.
didn't even
Yeah.
understand that it was going, that's what you're looking at doing. And it's not there yet.
Not there yet, something we're working on, but really we tried to break down all the typical pain points that
Yeah.
co-parents have in their financial relationships, such as always needing to upfront 100% of the money, the emotional stress of communicating about expenses and asking to be repaid, organizing all these expenses in your notepad or in the glove box with receipts, and how messy that can be, waiting up to 30 days to be repaid, lack of trust and transparency and receipts, and kind of take all these things that we've heard through these hundreds of conversations at this point and think about how could you stop some of these difficulties in their tracks with new and interesting innovative products.
I think that is an amazing idea. And I need you to keep me in the loop when that's all happening, because I think that my parents would, love to know, especially the one who is upfronting the money most often. And it's not that the other parent doesn't want to support them, but it's going to take that step out of having to keep track of all of that. So I love that. So
Yeah.
that's really unique.
Yeah.
We've been kind of talking about things that are unique about Onward. Anything else that comes to mind that stands out?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, you mentioned earlier around kind of the ability to use us to plan how much money you actually spend on to see how much money you're spending on the kids. Onward, actually, for many of our users, they tell us that it's the first time they've ever had transparency on what they and their co-parent are spending on their kids. Just want to go back to actually one of our reasons for being, which is that today, most child support payments only cover 3 categories of food, shelter, and clothing. And per the USDA, that's 53% of the cost of raising a child. So everything else, the medical bills, extracurricular activities, math tutoring, summer camp, etc., usually fall outside of that. And people will agree on a child support payment while they're in the divorce process. But then once they get divorced, there are all these expenses that are continuing to pile up, and they don't. And then very often, the person who's the provider of funds doesn't understand why they're being charged additional money for the kids. And that's really where you can get ahead of that in our app, by seeing exactly what you spend by category. So you can get ahead of, after the divorce, if we have a child support agreement in place, this is the amount of money that I expect to spend on top of that every single month. So yeah, that's something interesting about our product.
And that's a
otherwise,
really good point, because I can't tell you how many times someone will say, well, isn't that why I'm paying child support? And no,
exactly,
that's an
exactly.
extracurricular activity. That's not part of it. So that's awesome. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No, yeah. I mean, that's actually one of our reasons for being. I think in many ways the system wasn't necessarily set up to help co-parents succeed through this process in terms of which categories were included and which categories are not included. The other thing I would say we're doing very differently is building a really incredible brand with really interesting content for co-parents to help support them through the next stage in their journey. A lot of the companies I've seen out there in the divorce space create content that's very negative and backwards looking, like mostly focused around villainizing an ex or kind of bringing you back into the past. And the reason actually we're called Onward is really around bringing people into the future and getting them excited about that next stage of life as a co-parent. So you'll see a lot of content even integrated into our app around how to have the most effective co-parenting relationship, how to move on with your life. Also on our brand, on our blog, in our Instagram, we're really trying to build kind of a community and a brand that lifts people up and gets them excited about that next stage of life and relationship with their child as they move on through their co-parenting journey.
Okay, well now I know why I love you, because that is, I want to change this story. I want to change how we look at this. I want the children to do really well through it, and that means the parents doing well and getting along. So I love that you have that content. That's so helpful. So now tell me, do you have like a piece of advice for co-parents?
Yeah. I would say the piece of advice I would share is just kind of what I said before around go into the divorce process if you're currently in the process, knowing that child support typically only covers these three categories of food, shelter, and clothing, which is roughly half the cost of raising a child. And be prepared that there will be additional expenses outside of that that both you and your ex need to talk about. And the more you can talk about it before the divorce is finalized and be on the same page that there are going to be expenses outside of child support that you'll need to deal with every single month, which is kind of why we created Onward. The better it will be and the easier it will be once you're past the divorce to have those conversations. And even better would be look at what you're actually spending on your kids. Our app helps you do that so that you can say, on average, we're spending $600 a month or $300 or $1,000 or whatever it might be on those additional expenses for medical, extracurricular, etc., and get ahead of those conversations while you're in the process or early on post-divorce so that this just becomes a part of your financial routine with your ex.
Yeah. And Jacklyn, you're making me a better mediator. That's why I like having people like you on, because I don't know that in the past I've addressed that enough. We're just trying to dig through and get through child support and figure out how you're going to split the expenses. But to really prepare people for the other expenses makes it so they don't have that horrible conflict in the future. So I so love what you're doing. I support what you're doing. I'm so thankful that there are people like you out there doing these things to help my clients, to help co-parents in general. So Jacklyn, so you can go to the app store, get Onward. You can find it in my show notes. I think I've got something in my resources on my website too, where people can find you. Any other place that people should be looking for you?
You could also find us on our website, so onwardapp.com. You could find us on Instagram. So either of those places would be great places to look.
Wonderful. And we will have all that information in the show notes. So listeners, go there, check it out. It's a great resource for parents. Jacklyn Rome, thank you so much for taking the time and to share what you're doing.
My pleasure. It's absolute. It's lovely to speak to you today, and I hope that your listeners get a lot of value out of the conversation.
Sounds good. Take good care.
Thank you so much.